Doll is, without a doubt, one of the most interesting characters in the series. A drone who witnessed the death of her parents, plotted to get revenge on the drone who killed them through any means necessary, was the daughter of a drone who had a personal connection to the main protagonist's mother and uses the same set of powers she does. All of this brings a great deal of potential to the table for this character that unfortunately is never fully realized throughout the show. At best, we see Doll and Uzi develop drastically different perspectives on the murder drones based on their interactions with them, which makes a good setup for the rivalry, only for it to never really be expanded on further. A common defense for Doll's characterization is that it's meant to lean into her being a dark reflection of Uzi, essentially since her not teaming up with the main cast is what led to her demise in episode 7. As much as I like this episode though, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is a satisfying conclusion to her character, after she only had one episode of being any significance while the rest either forgets she exists or actively damages her character for the sake of plot convenience. Especially considering how contrived her death is from a logistical standpoint, when we know what solver drones are capable of surviving, but we'll get to that later. Focusing on Doll's relevance in the show, the series generally has a sort of monster of the week format, where the main threat the characters face changes after they defeat or bypass the last one, meaning that the villains only get a short period of time before being cast aside or reduced to cannon fodder. As an unfortunate result of this, however, Doll's significance to the story is only diminished as the show goes on. Doll first appears in the pilot as an unnamed background character, and is properly introduced in episode 2, and is the main antagonist of episode 3. After this though, Doll fades into the background and only occasionally pops up to cause minor inconveniences to the main cast, before returning to irrelevance and eventually dying. Doll's promise to Uzi at the end of episode 3 never impacts the plot later on, nor does their rivalry go any further beyond what episode 3 shows us. It's at this point that the first major problems with her character start to surface. Point 1. Doll's actions don't line up with her established character. Doll wanting to kill V makes perfect sense. She was the drone who killed her parents after all, and actually witnessing her parents to be killed was what would cement this vengeance-driven mindset we see in episode 3. Doll not wanting to side with Uzi after she shows up to the prom with N and stops her from killing V also makes sense. Uzi believes the only way to move forward is working with the MDs, while Doll believes that their help is not only dangerous, but unnecessary given what solver drones like her are capable of. So far, so good. The same, however, cannot be said for Uzi before she shows up to the prom and is at Doll's apartment. Why would Doll want to kill Uzi here? Some might say, oh, because Uzi knows about the disappearing drones. Even though there's no indication that Doll is aware of that, nor is Uzi one of the prom queens. Uzi's name is nowhere to be seen on the list Doll has, nor would it make logical sense for her to be a prom queen given how unpopular Uzi's established to be in the first 2 episodes and this one. We even get a line of dialogue from Lizzie that remarks on this.
Dude, no one will notice she's missing.
From Doll's perspective, there wouldn't be any logically beneficial outcome from having Uzi killed, especially considering she watched Uzi kill Jay in the pilot episode. If Doll knew Uzi was capable of killing MDs, wouldn't she want her on her side to enact this plan? Some people might be quick to point out it's not in character for Doll to work with other characters, based on the whole dark reflection to Uzi idea, even though this is objectively not true. In this very episode, we see she's willing to work with Lizzie to enact her plan of killing V, and even Tessa and Jay in episode 5, who would I argue make a lot less sense for Doll to team up with as opposed to Uzi by herself. Once again, more on that later. At this point, there isn't any logical incentive to kill Uzi, considering she'd be a massive help when it comes to taking out disassembly drones. Even if we're accepting that Doll and Uzi don't have any sort of friendship like their parents did, surely she'd be smart enough to acknowledge the fact that she could use Uzi as a contingency of sorts in case things went south. Regardless of if Doll was planning to kill Uzi or make some kind of alliance with her while she's at her apartment, I think there's a very easy fix to this that could do a much better job at solidifying them as rivals. Have Doll's parents die in the pilot as a direct consequence of Uzi's actions. If Uzi letting the MDs in is what caused Doll's parents to die, then it would give her a far more legitimate reason not to side with Uzi and have her killed alongside V. As far as she'd be concerned, it would be all Uzi's fault and she'd be just as much to blame as V. It would also put a greater emphasis on how Doll and Uzi go about their plans to kill the MDs. While Doll's plan was very drawn out, methodical, and likely would have succeeded had Uzi and N not intervened, Uzi's only went as far as getting the parts she needed for her railgun, and we see how quickly that goes bad once N and the others follow her back to the bunker, leading to a plethora of unintended consequences, including the death of her parents. This small change fixes so many problems and actually goes a long way to establish Doll developing an intense hatred and general feeling of antagonism towards Uzi. And I'd actually want Doll to say that Uzi caused her parents to die during the prom fight, and have that be the crux of her hatred towards her and V. because just making it some easy to miss background details some psychoanalyst YouTuber has to point out for anyone to even notice would take away from the impact it could otherwise have on both their characters. But I think Doll refusing to work with Uzi before the prom in episode 3 pales in comparison to her working with Tessa and Jay in episode 5. As far as we know, Doll doesn't know about Sin or where the MDs really came from. There's nothing in the show that really suggests she even does. Even if this is the case, she'd still have absolutely no reason to trust these two. For starters, Jay is a disassembly drone. Not the exact one who killed her parents, but still is one regardless. That by itself should already be a red flag for Doll in this situation, but keep in mind regardless of how much she knows, she's certain that both V and Jay came from the same source. Then there's Sin disguised as Tessa, which episode 7 confirms that Doll believes she's human, but that doesn't automatically mean she should just trust her. As far as she's aware, Tessa was sent by the same company who sent V and caused her parents to die. Furthermore, Doll had absolutely no information about Tessa's past, so she wouldn't know how kind she was to drones back on Earth. This alliance, however short-lived, was made purely to get all the antagonists and protagonists together in the same place for episode 6. What really breaks it is that it completely contradicts Doll's character. Lizzie and Doll were clearly friends of some kind before they moved forward with their plan to kill V. These characters knew each other, and Doll trusting Lizzie to carry out this plan and lure V into a trap makes logical sense in this situation. The deal with Tessa and Jay, in contrast, makes Doll look extremely stupid. What makes this even worse is that Doll's death only happened because of her getting the attention of Sin and making the deal with her pretending to be Tessa alongside Jay. Had Doll recovered the key bug, gone to Cabin Fever Labs by herself, and gotten the patch, she'd have not only gotten herself cured, but would actually be straight up in a better position than Uzi during the events of episodes 6 and 7. That's not exactly good if Doll fully committing to the dark reflection theory and not accepting help from anyone puts her in a better position than the character she's meant to be a foil to. Kind of undermines the message, don't you think? And yes, Doll could have canonically done this based on how she never got boot looped by the Sentinels or captured by Alice. The only reason she pretended to be paralyzed at the end of episode 6 was to get the drop on Uzi and the others, which also damages Doll's intelligence further by having her put herself in a position where she relies entirely on blind luck to succeed rather than a thought-out plan. Everything would have to go perfectly right for this trap to result in their deaths. The elevator has to drop exactly at the right place in the right time. Doll would have to be perfectly positioned to go down the shaft while the gang cannot, and no one can react quickly enough to stop her, escape, or chase her down there. Doll's life is also an extreme risk at this state. Tessa could immediately kill her while she's down and take the key bug from her dead hands. She could be killed or stuck up there if things don't go exactly right. The Sentinels could easily rip her apart while she's helpless to fight back against them. Alice could have abducted her and killed Doll herself. Or hilariously, V and the others could already be dead thanks to Alice and the Sentinels. Imagine if Doll just lied there for hours on end and wasted all the time she could have spent looking for the patch, just to find out that the main characters in Sin were straight up dead. Didn't I just say that relying on blind luck to succeed rather than a thought-out plan sounds more like something early series Uzi would do? Specifically Uzi from the pilot? The same Uzi who caused the MDs to get in? Inconsistent writing, this is. I understand that Doll was in a violent, vengeful state of mind, but that doesn't excuse her actions becoming narrative crutches to artificially generate conflict, rather than making sense according to her own internal logic, while contradicting her previously established meticulous planning from earlier in the series. Her choices at the end of both episodes are made to facilitate narrative contrivances and push the plot forward, not reflect the internal logic of her character. The irrelevance of Doll's actions to who she's meant to be in the show, coupled with them having no lasting consequences, proves her role in the story is no longer to be a character, but to be a plot device. Unfortunately, as a plot device, Doll still fumbles. Point 2. Doll was not an effective foil to Uzi. Even though I personally like the idea of Doll being an evil mirror type of character, meant to directly oppose Uzi's core values and beliefs, part of me is beginning to suspect if this is an intentional choice on the part of the writer, or an instance of the fandom headcanoning this parallel to defend the show for the sake of defending it regardless of writing quality. Certainly wouldn't be the last time the fandom tried to use foil archetypes as an excuse to justify why certain characters are more poorly written than others. I'm looking at you, Jay. It's easy to see this archetype on a surface-level basis since her and Uzi both have solver powers and inherited them from their mothers, but the very short runtime of this series combined with the limited interactions Doll and Uzi have, along with her contradictory decisions that more closely align with Uzi's nature rather than her own, heavily damages this message. Even if we were to accept that Doll was intended to be a foil to Uzi from the very start, this symbolism doesn't excuse the weightlessness of Doll's presence. If she's going to be a diametric opposite to Uzi in every way, she needs a larger presence in the story. Killing off a bunch of nameless background characters isn't going to cut it anymore. Her actions need to have lasting consequences. She needs to be the catalyst for significant events in the narrative. She needs the purpose in the story beyond being oozy, but evil, and doing out-of-character things for the sake of plot convenience. I mentioned previously how the show's Monster of the Week format hurt Dahl's presence in the story, and this is especially true in the latter half of the series. The biggest flaws of both episodes 6 and 7, in my opinion, is the introduction of additional plot devices disguised as characters, and having them take up a huge portion of screen time as opposed to actually developing the characters who appeared in previous episodes. Alice only shows up in this episode without any form of foreshadowing in the previous ones, and then dies in the same one she's introduced, after which she's never referenced or referred to again, not even in the next episode when her ID appears and belongs to a completely different drone. Even the Sentinels had more foreshadowing and story relevance than she did. Nori, despite being Uzi's mother, makes absolutely no sense to introduce as a character after being absent for the entire series and only exists as a plot device. It's also worsened by the fact that she only shows up just as Uzi is being taken over by the Solver and they arrive at Cabin Fever Labs. You mean to tell me that for several years, Nori's been searching for the patch and only manages to find it just as the people she's looking for come to her? That in of itself is needlessly contrived, but it's worsened by the fact that Nori has no character to speak of. She's basically just Uzi, but a MILF. She exists purely to give exposition and spoon feed N everything he needs, from information to aid in combat, rather than having him figure everything out himself and do the heavy lifting. Why create these brand new, undercooked characters to move the plot along and give N something to do while he's separated from Uzi when that could have just as easily been accomplished with Dahl? Why not have Dahl interact with Uzi while they're separated from the other characters in episode 7 and actually challenge Uzi's core beliefs when they're already being pushed to the limits? Why not have Dahl, I don't know, actually be a fucking character and a foil to Uzi at the same time? I'm sorry, but Dahl being a narrative foil does not excuse this absolutely lackluster utilization of her character post-episode 3. Her rivalry with Uzi is never developed any further beyond their surface-level beliefs in the MDs. She never gets any on-screen development in her own right, nor is her claim to want to help Uzi at the end of episode 3 ever elaborated on. Especially considering that, had Dahl's makeshift trap succeeded, Uzi would have been killed alongside Sin in the MDs. What really puts salt in the wound is that, as a villain, Dahl is, for the most part, underwhelming. Outside of getting the key bug from Uzi, Dahl has no real victories in the series. Sure, it's a step up from Jay, who doesn't have any that were on screen, but that's not a really high bar, especially compared to Sin, who's constantly ahead of the protagonists. Speaking of which, both Uzi and Sin have Solver forms, but Dahl just doesn't. It's implied that she had similar struggles to Uzi when it first became active in her and wants to cure it, but we never actually see Dahl in the feral state like we do with the other two. Plus, Dahl in episode 7 somehow knows the Solver is capable of destroying planets, which, how? And while we're on the topic of episode 7, it's finally time to talk about the straw that broke the camel's back. Dahl's death makes absolutely no sense. So I guess I'll start with the elephant in the room. Why does her Solver stop repairing her body? No, seriously, this is completely out of nowhere and only adds to the stupidity of the whole sequence. It's not just the eye we see covered with a button in episode 5 and onwards. Sin rips her torso open, and during the span of Sin attacking and advancing on Uzi, and taking control of her before pitting her against N and Nori, Dahl doesn't regenerate her wounds and rise back to her feet, nor does her core attempt to escape her body and get out of the cathedral before it can be eaten, even though we know for a fact Solver drones are capable of both things. In fact, in the very next episode, Uzi suffers a very similar injury and recovers in less than a minute, while Nori's core managed to escape her body, presumably after being stabbed with nanite acid. Dahl, on the other hand, doesn't attempt either of these things, and ends up dying as a result. We literally see Dahl's visor repair itself in episode 3 after V shot her in the back of the head, so it's not like she just never had the ability to regenerate, because she clearly did. And if Sin just had the ability to stop her Solver from regenerating, why not use that on Uzi when she's actively trying to kill her, especially in episode 8 before Uzi figured out she can nullify her control? There are ways Dahl could have been killed in this episode without resorting to this last minute, oh yeah, her Solver doesn't regenerate bullshit excuse. So why does the show kill her off in this blatantly lazy manner, instead of working with what was previously established to be lethal to Solver drones? The truth is, the answer was right in front of us the whole time, and it had nothing to do with her being Uzi's foil. It's because the plot needed her to die here. Contrary to what everyone says, Dahl's death had nothing to do with concluding her story in an effective or symbolic way. It was once again for the sake of convenience. Had Dahl been alive in the finale, there would have been another loose end to tie up. Not to mention, V escaping Dingo territory without any consequences would inevitably lead to conflict between the two. Something had to be done about Dahl, and rather than giving her a proper death scene that a Solver drone couldn't have survived, like her core getting eaten by Sin when she attacked her in the tunnels, instead of in the cathedral where she easily should have been able to recover her wounds and escape, or developing her character in an effective or satisfactory way that either leads to her death or a potential alliance with Uzi. She was killed off in the most contrived, illogical, and self-defeating way possible. It certainly doesn't help that Doll could have easily survived this had she had any basic survival instincts. Like, if she had just teleported away before Sin closed the distance and just didn't stand there and make herself stick out like a sore thumb, she easily could have escaped and warned Uzi of what was coming. But I guess Doll's IQ was damaged to the point of no return in the previous 2 episodes, so she just stood there like an idiot and got folded by none other than Freddy Fazbearrington himself, marking the end of this worthwhile and well-realized character. Oh yeah, she's also a ghost now and may or may not be living inside Uzi's head along with Sin, because God forbid we have any semblance of permanent lasting consequences in our show about murderous robots. Point 3. Doll serving her purpose doesn't hold up. A common defense people used in relation to Doll's death the way she was handled during the show's run was that she served her purpose in the story. I don't think it needs to be repeated, but Doll, both as a foil to Uzi and as a character in her own right, is for the most part, unfortunately, underwhelming. The only exception to this I can really think of would be episode 3, but there's a reason why she worked in that episode and not in the others. It's because in episode 3, she was an actual threat, one who needed to be taken seriously, and would have actually killed V had Uzi not intervened. Killing a disassembly drone, at least back in the day before it had become trivialized in the later episodes, was treated like an impressive feat. But it's not just the fact that Doll is capable of doing so, it's also the way that she goes about killing V that's important to consider when it comes to how she thinks as a character. She doesn't blindly rush into combat like Sin and overwhelm her opponents with brute force. She actually had to set up a trap and plan everything out. This goes to show that Doll's strengths as a character were never solely her solver abilities, but as an intelligent and methodical strategist. Her motives are also made explicitly clear in the previous episode and expanded on further in this one. Her killing other workers for the sake of this plan is a bit excessive on the surface level, but it actually does a decent job at foreshadowing Solver Uzi in the next episode, especially a scene where Uzi sucks oil off of her fingers. My only complaint with Doll killing workers is that we never see how it affects her mentally that she's basically cannibalizing her own kind, which is less of an issue with Doll herself and more of a byproduct of the show being allergic to sincerity and grounded character moments. Even the scene where Doll tries to kill Uzi with the bullet is also interesting because it shows another side to her. She's shown to display sympathy towards Uzi for the first time and even offers to help her find something which will help them both, which is quite unexpected from what we've seen of her character so far, especially considering what happens in this episode. Compare this version of Doll to the watered-down idiot we see throughout episode 5 to 7, and it's like as if the writer completely forgot about episode 3. The strategic side of her character never comes into play again, especially during pivotal moments like when Sin is rushing at her, or when she has a gaping hole in her chest and doesn't think to eject her core and crawl away. The decisions she makes from this point onward are incredibly stupid and contradictory to her character. Willingly working with 2 characters who came from the same source as V and putting herself at extreme risk to try and kill Uzi, Sin, and the MDs. Also, why did she try to attack Sin in melee combat during episode 7? Even though Doll thinks she's human, wouldn't it make more sense to try restraining her with a solver first, and upon attempting to do so, realizing that she isn't what she appears to be? Remember, Doll doesn't have a solve form and excels at range combat as opposed to melee, and since we previously established her as a strategist, shouldn't she be more cautious about a direct confrontation? As far as her connection to Uzi goes, it doesn't really go any deeper than what is stated at the start of the video. I already stated that the Dark Reflection parallel doesn't work due to Doll accepting help from an MD and a human, which is more aligned with what Uzi would do than what Doll would do, coupled with the deal with being the reason why Sin knows where she is and ultimately cost Doll her life. If her death was supposed to be symbolic or a warning of what would have happened to Uzi if she never accepted help, then she would have died in episode 6 to either Alice or the Sentinels. In terms of her relationship towards Uzi, at best we see Doll develop a begrudging respect towards her in episode 5, but that's about it. And this whole begrudging respect never comes into play again, considering that she literally tries to kill her in episode 6. Nothing comes out of her promise to help Uzi at the end of episode 3, nor does Doll ever challenge Uzi's beliefs when they're already at their breaking point in episode 7. Considering the backstories of both characters and the fact they both endured the same struggles, it's massively disappointing how the show treats Doll like she never mattered in spite of everything, while Uzi's treated like the universe's last hope for survival. So no, Doll really didn't serve her purpose, unless you consider facilitating plot conveniences in both episodes 5 and 6 to be some kind of fulfillment of that. Even if she did serve a purpose, that's the bar minimum of what she should have accomplished. The best villains are not those who just serve their purpose, but excel at it and more. For example, look at Tai Lung or Lord Shen from the Kung Fu Panda movies. The writers could have just written them to be obstacles that the hero has to overcome and have them serve their purpose, but they went the extra mile and made them into fleshed out characters while also having them serve as very effective foils to Poe. Not to mention, both these villains have an immense presence in their respective films and are integral to the overall narrative. They aren't just plot devices, they're a genuine threat. Sin is pretty much the only villain with any sort of presence in the series, though she's not a particularly fleshed out character. Doll, however, had the potential to be more complex, and there were plenty of opportunities for her actions to have pivotal consequences. For example, if V stayed dead because of Doll, then Uzi and N would have to lock the fuck in if they wanted any shot of taking down Sin. Or maybe J could have gotten actual development since people wouldn't be able to fall back on the J being V's foil card since the latter of the two is several feet down under. And since we're on the topic of making changes, maybe there's a few tweaks that could actually improve Doll as a character and maybe give her a more defined role in the story. I see two potential directions we can take her character in after episode 3. 1. Lean fully into her being Uzi's foil and show her descent towards her downfall in an effective and satisfactory way. Or 2. Have Doll's respect towards Uzi develop and give her a redemption arc later in the series. Starting off with 1, the first thing I'd change is lean more into Doll's antagonistic nature in the other episodes. Maybe during episode 4 she intentionally steals Uzi's backpack to take away her oil and essentially force her to go on a killing spree. This would show how much more familiar Doll is with the way the solver functions, while also giving her a presence in the plot since she indirectly caused the camp massacre through Uzi. Instead of this just being shrugged off and forgotten, I'd have Uzi straight up get banished from the colony for the murder she's committed, and have her go into N and V's memories in a different location outside of the comfort of her home, like the cabins we see in this very episode. Besides, do you really think Lizzie of all drones isn't going to tell anyone what happened? Trusting her to keep a secret she could easily gossip about and garner attention from others is like trusting Spy TF2 not to shove his metal spike in your spinal cord. It's just not going to happen. Then, once the events of episode 5 happen and Doll shows up to the cabin Uzi and the MDs are hiding in to steal a keybug, you could finish off the episode by having them chase after Doll, only for her to escape with it into the facility, leaving us to the cliffhanger for episode 6 that doesn't assassinate her character. And since we're fully leaning her into being Uzi's foil, we could have her die in episode 6 instead of 7, because if Doll never accepting help from anyone is what leads to her downfall and fully embraces the dark reflection theory, then either having Alice kill her or the Sentinels do so just makes more sense. I could definitely see this move as anticlimactic though. So if Doll has to die in episode 7, then I'd either have her get into a fight with a pissed off N and die after he stabs her core, giving him some closure for V's death, or improve the Sin death instead of just her pulling a withered Foxy and rushing down a corridor and hoping Doll doesn't teleport. I'd have Sin actually show her a manipulative side more and use her holograms to create projections of Yiva. Now I know some people are going to say Doll wouldn't fall for that because she watched her mother die, but let me cook for a minute. This projection of Yiva could be holding the patch Doll's been searching for, and even give her an explanation of how she's still alive. Basically, JC Jensen had a contingency plan and gave Yiva a backup body in case things went wrong with Nori, which would make sense considering what was happening with Nori. I also think this would be a good opportunity to actually have Doll show emotion. Maybe show her crying while calling out to what she thinks is her mother and ready to embrace her, only for her to phase right through the projection when she tries to hug it, followed by a tentacle with one of those human hand things bursting through Doll's chest, tearing out her core before she gets dragged down the tunnel. I think this would be the most tragic possible way to have her character get sent off. For once we actually get to see Doll happy, finally reuniting with her mother, only for it to be scornfully ripped away. It also instantly kills her in a lethal manner that she can't just escape or recover from, so it fixes that glaring issue as well. Now for the Doll redemption arc. Actually, less of a redemption arc and more of an alternate route we can take her character. Here's something I really need to emphasize though. V has to die permanently in order for this long-term alliance with Uzi to work. I do not see Doll ever willingly siding with V, especially considering what she did to her parents. N, maybe, but that's still a very strong maybe considering he is a disassembly drone after all. But if there is any character I could see Doll actually wanting to help, it would be Uzi. Excluding any moments that damage her character such as the deal with Tessa and Jay, I think most of Doll's action would be the same as they are in the show up until episode 6 where she's chased into the labs. Either Doll could help Uzi escape, or Doll herself is captured by Alice and Uzi sets her free. Not entirely sure if V would die to Doll afterwards or something later in the episode, but if either is the case it could be used to develop N more. Maybe Uzi starts mistrusting En and Tessa a bit more after realizing that there's something going on, which could be used to further expand on that dynamic as well. Then, once we get to episode 7, we can have Doll interact with Uzi while she's separated from En and Tess in the lower floor of the labs. I could see Doll remarking how stupid it was for Uzi to put her trust in En before explaining to Uzi that it's a very real possibility that En could have killed Nori, and now he and Tess are planning to do the same to both her and Uzi. This is sort of a rough draft how it goes, but basically instead of Sin using Uzi as a puppet, Doll manipulates Uzi to turn on En, while Sin tries manipulating En to turn on Uzi. Now, assuming that Doll doesn't die or someone else doesn't get killed here and the Sinestro reveal happens, in the finale Doll could put her differences aside with the others and possibly help in defeating Sin. And considering that Doll would be the only other character capable of teleporting and outmaneuvering Sin, she could distract her while En and Uzi do the heavy hitting until they manage to bring her down. Once the dust settles and Sin is defeated, permanently this time I might add, maybe Doll can actually have a character moment with Uzi and for the first time she could actually open up to someone. This also gives Uzi a chance to show how she's grown as a character and not solely revolve around En. Something, we aren't so different you and I, Spider-Man! And when all is said and done, maybe in the credits Doll and Uzi can be shown being friends, or at the very least more tolerant of each other's presence. Generally I think the first option of leading more into Uzi being Doll's foil would be easy to write, but this might be able to work if done right. Again, it's just a rough draft, it's not going to be perfect, there's definitely a lot of changes that could be made to better justify what happens, but I think there's a lot of potential for Doll that was just never explored. And that's really a thing I want to emphasize. As a character, Doll always had a lot of narrative potential to be explored, but unfortunately as the show went on, she was given less to do and lost a lot of meaningful impact she could have otherwise had on the arcs later on. But it's not just the wasted potential that's an issue, it's how her intelligence and mindset degraded in the later episodes as well. No longer is Doll the cunning strategist we see in episode 3. Now she's just an idiot who makes contradictory and self-defeating decisions that ultimately lead to her death. If the show actually explored Doll becoming more arrogant and aggressive with her sulfur powers, or if she had a sulfur form like Uzi and Sin do to better justify her overconfidence, it might have been enough to very least explain what was going on in her head during the events of episode 5 and 7. But now that resolution will never come to pass. Doll is, in every sense of the word, a hollowed out husk of her former self, in both a figurative and literal sense. If there's anything poetic about her fate, it's that she had the possibility of being so much more, but was never allowed to live up to it, much like the series as a whole.